Okay, welcome back, everybody. And if you're just joining us, welcome to the Tech for Good Summit. You've missed a huge amount, but don't worry, it's all recorded, so you can watch it all back at your leisure. You've heard a lot today about the Tech for Good movement, the activity that's going on globally, and also in the UK. But we are going stateside today for our keynote, our next keynote presentation. So we have Mark Littlewood, who is the co-founder of Business Org. So he's going to be Business Software Org. He's going to be interviewing Ali Morano, who is from the East Coast of America and is the global MD of Tech for Social Good for JP Morgan. And we've heard a lot from different people from JP Morgan, of course, the course of today, and there's a huge amount going on in Tech for Good in JP Morgan. So really looking forward to the conversation. Welcome, Ali. Thank you for joining us. It must be, what is it? Are you 5 hours behind where you are?
Yeah, it's a normal hour. Unfortunately, I missed the early part of the conference because of the hour, though.
No problem. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Mark, for joining us as well. From wherever you are, where are you joining us from, Mark?
I'm joining us from Cambridge, England, or proper Cambridge, as I like to call it, when I'm running my Boston conferences.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I'm going to duck out and allow you to take over from here. I believe I'm handing over to you, Mark. So really looking forward to the conversation, and I'll see you at the end of the conversation.
This is so scary. Thanks so much, Graham. Welcome. I'm Mark Littlewood, as Graham so kindly said. I'm in Cambridge, England, and I'm joined by Ali Morano, who's based over in Connecticut on the East Coast. Very excited about this. Been a fantastic set of sessions today so far. I don't know if people can put things into the chat comments, but I'd love to know what highlights that people have had up to this point, and I hope we'll be able to keep the momentum going. So one thing I'm very pleased about, Ali, is that we have kind of colour coordinated mugs here. So I've got a black and white one, and you had a black and white one, although yours isn't quite as corporate and stylish. Yeah, I've got tea and you've got coffee. Ali, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you spending some time here. We're going to cover quite a lot, but before we really get going, I'd love you just to give a little introduction to yourself. You are particularly interesting because you're working in JP Morgan at the moment, but were in a not-for-profit before. Is that so? Please welcome, and you can clap your hands wherever you are, and welcome Ali Morano.
Thanks, Mark. It's really great to be here. And I know you've spoken or heard from a couple of my colleagues earlier today, so I'm sorry I didn't get to hear all of their conversation. If I'm repeating anything, put into the chat and let us know that you've heard about this before, so I don't want to waste your time. But yes, I did start earlier in my career. I did help run a nonprofit that did tech assistance for other nonprofits called NPower, which very much to our chagrin, very early on, we learned it was a power company in the UK, which you're much more familiar than we were early on. We had organizations reaching out to us complaining about their electric being off, and all we were trying to do was fix the technology for organizations in New York City. So that organization evolved over many years, really to connect organizations, nonprofit organizations, with the very needed tech skills that they needed to be able to better deliver on their missions. And we started doing that with corporates. And in essence, we were connected to JP Morgan through some board members, and that gave us the opportunity to really build out some great solutions to connect them in a more thoughtful way through some volunteer matching. And that kind of became the impetus or the early stages of what we now run at JP Morgan, which is Tech for Social Good.
Fabulous. Thank you. Give us a little bit of background then about how you started working with JP Morgan in the first place, because again, this is a pretty interesting story.
So towards the end of my career at NPower, what we were very much focused on was it was a recession that was going on, and organizations or corporations that were typically funding nonprofits with dollars were starting to say, you know what, we're not going to give you money anymore, we're going to give you people. And isn't that great? And most nonprofits inwardly said no, outwardly said yes. And we're in a very precarious situation because they didn't know how to manage the individuals that were going to be coming in or how to set up really meaningful engagement. But the concern was if you said no, when the dollars came back, they wouldn't be coming to them. So we came in and we stepped in as an organization and designed basically a matching tool that helped nonprofits better craft and frame what their IT needs were, and also help the volunteers on the corporate side come in and not have to feel like the savior, but in a very structured environment with guardrails in place to help them understand, here's how we can better support the organizations that we're going to be working with. And in doing so, as I mentioned a minute ago, two of the board members of my nonprofit were actually senior executives at JP Morgan. And I was presenting this at a board meeting one day, and they said, I feel like we do a lot of this here at JP Morgan, but we don't have a lot of impact. And somewhat flippantly, I turned to them, I said, well, because you're not doing it right, and you're not doing it with a lot of strategy.
It's a reasonable answer.
Very
good start to an interview.
It wasn't an interview. It wasn't what I was thinking. It was just more of just like, all you corporates think you do everything right and you don't. And so it was kind of me being a little bit snub, just thinking like, of course you don't know what you're doing because this is social sector is hard. And it's like getting in there, you need to know how to do it. You need to know how to do it right. And that's why you're not doing it well. So I then went off and he kind of looked at me and I went off that evening and basically pounded out an email that became kind of the early business plan, if you will, for what is tech for social good. And to their credit, they wrote back and said, we're interested. And the rest, as you say, is history. It came over. And what we'll talk about today, is a very established organization with 50 plus individuals on staff, with 5 major programs with a suite of programming underneath them. That did not happen overnight. It took years to build this, an amazing team to execute on it that we had to build over time. But it's a very proud moment for all of us to be able to talk about it here today.
Absolutely, and I'd like to go into that a little bit more. When did you join JP Morgan? And you said they were doing things as a lot of large organisations do in different ways. Did you come in and inherit a bunch of things, and you were told, "Hey, Ali, sort it out," or what happened there?
No. Yes, so I joined JP Morgan in 2010, and when I joined JP Morgan, they weren't doing anything. They knew that some staff might be engaging in some volunteerism, but it was all on their own. The formal volunteerism that JP Morgan was fostering as a company was what you might call more traditional volunteerism. Let's go plant a garden in the local park. Let's go read to second graders, to a bunch of 8-year-olds and help them understand from a literacy standpoint. So more so-called non-skilled or non-professional skills, and nothing else was really coordinated. So I started doing very much what you might call dialing for dollars and just calling up individuals saying, I heard through so-and-so that after school you go into, or after work, you go into this school, to this nonprofit, and you've been helping them with their database. You've been helping with this. Did you know that JP Morgan can actually help you support that? And we can actually engage. And it was really interesting to kind of see the reaction. And similarly calling nonprofits and saying, hey, we'd like to engage and we can help you. I think the reaction was, well, you're talking about financial services, sure. But now you're talking about my tech and you're a bank and this doesn't make sense to me. So it took a lot of convincing internally and externally to really get people to understand the impact of what we could do. And that's something that was good education as we went through it. But we also did a bunch of much larger projects when we first started and recognized that was, it was actually much more typical of what we saw in corporate space. Let's do a big bang. Let's have a big, huge project. But the reality was, we recognized there was a huge opportunity to connect this back to the talent at JP Morgan. And the larger projects you did, there wasn't a lot of connection point to JP Morgan staff. It was more, we were throwing money at it, and we did have some staff volunteering on it, but it was more about the external splash, which felt good, but we really wanted our staff to actually feel good as well. And not just because they could tell the story, but because they were a part of the story. And that's something that we very much focused on and really shifted the way that we were delivering our programming to ensure that staff could properly engage.
And how long did it take you to make that change within the organization?
Probably took about 1.5 years. I think when I think about some of the first projects that we were doing, they were definitely much more larger scale, smaller groups of individuals engaging, and we were doing things as we were getting started. We did a lot of trial and error, which I think I've always been very comfortable with. And, in the corporate space, I think they're becoming more comfortable with it. Definitely we work in more agile ways, but we were very much like, will this work? Will that work? What kind of population makes sense? What type of organizations? What types of projects? Until we had a bit of a stride, I think it took about 1.5 years until we said, this makes more sense. And then we started scaling appropriately and really kind of listening much more with a customer-centric focus. But our customer was everybody from the talent and workforce that we had, the talent and workforce that we wanted to recruit, nonprofits that we were looking to serve, businesses that we were banking, and individuals that also wanted to bring their financial services banking to JP Morgan. So we have a pretty wide stakeholder group that we're serving, and really think about the right way to deliver to them.
So we're going to talk about some of the successes. I think it's really easy to celebrate the successes because they're successes, and success has many parents. What were some of the things that you tried at the beginning that you thought were going to work and thought were great ideas and just fell flat? And what did you learn?
The first things that come to mind are really the people that we chose to get involved in, the types of projects that we took on. So initially, we weren't sure that we were going to be able to get as many JP Morgan staff engaged as we wanted. So we would have universities contact us, and they would do something called what they would call a capstone project. And they would say, can you help organize a project for a group of our university students to work on or practice a particular skill or solution to deliver for a social good organization? And we would do that, and we would connect the university students to a nonprofit that we had a relationship with, and then off they went. That was a bit of a disaster. The students were too junior. They didn't have enough oversight, and we recognized that wasn't going to make sense. We needed to be engaged. We stepped it up and then said, okay, we'll do interns. We'll do interns that are working for JP Morgan. So now they're partially connected to us, and we will then be involved in that stage. That also didn't work. It was better, but still not quite there. And then finally, we just said, it's staff. We need to get to staff who are going to be engaged. We need this to be a part of the way that we do leadership and empathy development. We need this to be experiential opportunities for our staff. And that's made all the difference when we said, and it's also going to be part of their day job. This isn't going to be staff coming in and saying, okay, after hours, I'll go work at this school, or after hours, I'll go volunteer for this environmental organization. It's very much a part of their job, and it could be anywhere from like 8 hours to 8 months of how people are choosing to engage.
Interesting. And when you started, how long did you think it would take to start seeing the sort of results that you were hoping for? And I suppose everyone starts with a grand vision, but there's a strategy that takes you on the steps to get there. Were there any particular things that you were hoping to achieve, and how long did it take to get the right things to start, both from your perspective, but also the bank's?
I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday. We do not deliver the social good that we deliver in the purest sense of what like a mitzvah or philanthropy might be, or how somebody might describe, where you're saying we don't do it and hope nobody finds out. That's like, we just do it because we're such a good organization. We do it and do want people to find out. That's not the reason we do it, but we definitely want a story to be told, because it becomes a ripple effect, both internally for staff to feel better about working for an organization that's doing these good things, and other people know that they work for that organization, but externally that people who want to connect into us, whether from a staff or a banking perspective. So when we first started, we were in our minds, we were very much writing the headlines and saying, wouldn't it be great if in 6 months, in 1 year, in 5 years, we could see this kind of a story out there? How do we back our way into that? So that was some of the things that we started doing. There have been different points in time that have definitely jump-started some of our efforts. If I go backwards in time, think about different world crises. Like when we have the pandemic that's going on, people want to engage when things are going wrong in the world. People want to have some type of connection, like, how can I give back? There have been other things that have happened in time when it's been like, whether there was an earthquake somewhere or a hurricane, like different world natural disasters, whether, it's the war in Ukraine, different ways that people are saying, okay, now I need to connect. So they've definitely accelerated our need. And we've said, and then when you start hearing about talent, coming out of university, starting to say during an interview, and you're trying to be prepared for talent, we're going to ask about, tell me about what it's like to work at JP Morgan. Talent more and more is starting to come in saying, tell me about how I'm going to be connected to purpose when I join your organization. Tell me about what it means to work in a socially minded organization. And some of them, I think, know what they're asking, and some of them don't. But I think most of them are surprised by how thoughtful, engaged the answer is, when we can actually talk about, it's not just about what we do, it's how we do it, and how you will be actually very authentically integrated into that model.
That's interesting. So I know the audience here, there are absolutely some big organisations and some big corporates who, some of whom have spoken very eloquently about what they're up to. But we've also got a pretty large group of charities and third sector people. So one of the things I really want to dig into in a while is that how do you get on the radar of a JP Morgan? What sort of things do you think about to set up? And if anyone's watching and has a particular idea or thing that they want to have considered, let us know, and we'll try and we're not going to put Ali on the spot because that's not fair, and I know your team in the UK decides things, but do let us know if you've got any specific questions around getting in front of people. Tell me what the program looks like. What do you call it? How many people are involved? What's the structure at the moment?
Sure. So we refer to ourselves as a social impact practice that executes through core programming. What we say is that we're working to create and deliver programming for JP Morgan to be seen as a good corporate citizen. And that's our intent, is to be a good corporate citizen. And we do that by providing value for our clients, engaging experiences for our staff, and ultimately delivering for the social good sector. There are 5 core programs through which we execute. We work with youth, so everything we like to say from crayon to career, usually 18 and under. We're engaging them in a number of different ways about career opportunities, what it's like to be cyber safe and cybersecurity. We also engage, then we have a whole social good hackathons model, which is an assessment and recruitment tool. So we bring individuals in that are thinking about, hey, I might like to work at JP Morgan, and whether they're coding or they're thinking about design challenges, UX, UI, data for good, we bring in and we give them real challenges that organizations are facing. And we say, hey, ideate with us for the next 24 hours. It's an overnight event. It's an amazing opportunity for actually a 2-sided conversation where they get to know us and we get to know them. And those turn into offers on the back end, prototypes as well, that then get built out fully in a sister program that we call Force for Good. So Force for Good is our project-based programming where individuals come in and anywhere, usually around 8 months, but they can be shorter term projects. We're building out full-blown solutions with our staff. So these are, think about challenges that organizations are facing and delivering on their missions. We don't say to an organization, hey, come to us with your tech problems. So we say, come to us with a challenge that you're facing, and we talk about how technology can be a vehicle by which to address those issues and have a great conversation to see how we get there. We are mission agnostic when we engage. Our foundation isn't. We don't sit in the foundation, we sit in the business. So we're very much focused on what are going to be the right projects that are going to get our staff excited, are going to get our staff engaged, and also that we feel that we can be successful on delivering. So it doesn't matter where our foundation gives. If our foundation has a grantee, we still often will work with those organizations, but we're not constrained by the mission or the given priorities of the foundation. 2 other areas that we engage in are one around emerging talent and then also in DE&I. In the emerging talent space, we're very much focused on, as our CEO, likes to say, skills and not just degrees. So it's tapping untapped talent. Especially in the technology space, we are very aware that individuals get educated in rather unique ways, and a university degree, while definitely valued as a data point, is by no means required. And we want to make sure that we're meeting individuals where they are, which is a big flip for a company like JP Morgan. If you've ever read House of Morgan, you'll learn that JP Morgan, when he first started, intentionally put locations for JP Morgan in locations where people had to travel. They wanted it to be an experience. You come to us because we're going to give you these great banking services. We still do as a bank, but now we come to you. And when it comes to an individual, we're going to meet you where you are. And individuals are taking many different paths to their education, to employment. And unfortunately, the way we had been set up historically, we weren't finding those great people. And we're finding great people, but we were missing a large portion of the population that were sometimes unintentionally being overlooked. So emerging talent sets up internships and apprenticeships, and it's a great way to welcome talent into the firm that have maybe been educated somewhat differently. And then the last area is really about, in technology, when we say DE&I engaged, it's our market strategy for how do we engage with memberships and conferences that are happening in the industry. What are we going to say when we show up? Who are we going to send? What's the best thing that we can get out of a particular membership that we might have? So all different ways that we're connecting into different organizations. But for nonprofits to connect to us, there's an interest form, and we can make sure that gets shared out to the participants of this event afterwards. But there's different ways that organizations can connect in, whether it be an event, whether they actually want a project, or they want us just to particularly do something. It could just be more of a consultancy.
Okay, so you're a bank, so you invest, so you understand portfolio theory, right? And I guess one thing that you probably take to your programs here is that kind of portfolio approach, in that you have some short-term, lower cost things and some longer-term, higher cost things. How do you? I mean, is that a conscious way of approaching, and how do you how do you think that through? What's the approach?
So we definitely have a framework by which we engage with organizations, but we don't provide any money or any financing for any of these projects. So when we're engaging with an organization, there is a questionnaire, or basically a vetting process that we're saying to an organization, like, are you prepared financially? Should there be a financial commitment to a solution that we create, or a solution that you're going to engage with, to actually pay for it? We get no money from an engagement. This is not a financial product or solution that we're delivering. So we're doing it completely pro bono, if you will. But sometimes they might need to buy a piece of software or buy a piece of equipment. We need to make sure that if we're going to make that recommendation, the organization is set up for it. We're also making sure that the people that we're having the conversations with up front are the most senior people in those organizations. Sometimes an organization will say, well, I'm going to send you my intern, or I'm going to send you this really savvy, because they're the ones who understand tech. But if they can't make the decisions in the company, that's not the one we want to talk to, not up front anyway. So we're really making sure that we've got senior level buy-in when we do this, because it's a large effort for us, and we want to make sure that we've got the right commitment early on in that conversation. But then we do segment the type of work that we're doing. We'll think about, we're going to do, so that we have structure and framework around scoping, it could be around analytics, it could be UX, UI, it could be, we're going to be doing anything from a web app, you name it. But we've we'll put things in a little bit of a structure, because we'd like to build from what we've done before. It doesn't mean that we're taking everything, but we don't own anything, and we don't allow anybody that we give anything to completely have the full rights to anything as well. Everything can go out to open source. So we want to make sure that people can, in the greater good, can benefit from the work that we're creating, so that it has a larger impact down the road.
Yeah, I understand you're not putting money into things, but I think it's that you're investing resource, you're investing time, which is precious, and understanding that. How do you? Are there things that you really love doing? Are there projects that kind of come up and everyone's like, yep, that's pretty much a slam dunk? That's an American term for all the Scots and English here.
That's a hard one. I feel like you're asking me to say which.
It's not supposed to be easy.
Well, no, I feel like if you're asking me which of my kids do I like best, it's just, I think there are ones that come across and you just know this is going to be a great story, and we can do this. Some of the most fun ones are the ones that we've done year over year. So the ones that we've done a project with them, and then they continue to be a follow-on client year over year, because the client starts getting it. The client comes to us with better and better projects, or better and better ideas, because they recognize the value and what we bring to the table. And it becomes much more of like this two-way interaction. There's definitely favorite projects over the years of we can really resonate with what's happened, and you just see the impact. You can see things that we've executed being used in human crises that are happening around the world. So there's so many, and I can give you specific examples of different projects. But I think the repeat ones are always a lot of fun. But it's also when we can do something for just a tiny little organization to a really large one. It really is just about engagement. When the individuals at the table really get what's going on, and they're just as excited as we are, those are the best clients to work with.
Yeah. It's interesting you call them clients. Is that a conscious, everything's conscious?
What else? We've always called them clients. We're doing work for them. Just because it's free, and just because we're doing it in a social impact way, they're very much, we treat them with respect, and they deserve a high quality solution for us to be able to be handing over at the end of our efforts. So they're very much a client. We treat them with the same business respect we would do to a paying client at JP Morgan for any of our services. So we would never think of them any differently.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what's the organizational investment in the program, and how do you measure the investment?
So as you said, it's about resources, it's about staff. So we have a budget, within, but we have about 50 dedicated staff. We didn't start with that on day one. It took us years to grow to that number. We're a global organization, so we're operating all the major regions around the world. We tend to place staff. We have staff regionally based. So we think there's a lot of impact by having local individuals in the UK, in Asia Pacific, in the US, really directly engaging with organizations. So that's a big spread of how we set up our staff. But it's a hub and spoke model. So we're very much saying, okay, we've got staff here, reaching out then to thousands of staff across the global organization to get them engaged as well. And the financial investment, where we're spending money is everything from when we run our hackathons. That's probably one of our biggest expenses. So if it's an in-person event, we fly people in. We fly all the young people in that are attending these events. So that's probably some of our biggest expenses. We're buying swag for our staff to get excited and to kind of share the brand. We're buying swag for the participants at our hackathons to actually, walk around with a T-shirt and say, I did this. I was at this particular coding event. So most of the expenses really come down to that and salary and staff salary.
Yeah.
So, but we're pretty amazingly low cost to operate. For the size and scale of what we're able to do, we're a fraction of, what it might cost to engage a private organization to actually organize some type of pro bono for your staff. It's actually not a very expensive thing to do because it doesn't cost any money other than the staff that you have. It's just about dedicating to staff. We run a group called the Tech for Good Symposium with other businesses around the world, and we recognize that some of our peers often will actually engage, and they're doing it with borrowed staff. And I think that just limits in their scale. And it's a great way to get started, but longer term, to have the impact that you really need, it's about dedicating staff to this full time, and really saying that we're committed to this and we believe this is about the way that we do business, and not just something that we're seeing as more philanthropy off on the side.
Okay. How do you, and again, this is a difficult one because it's a very large 20,000 employees?
At JP Morgan?
Yeah.
250,000.
250,000.
We're a small country. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I was out by it's only an order of magnitude, Ellie. Okay. So 50 people. What do they do? What are their sort of primary activities in those teams? How do they spend most of their time looking at or managing in?
So I think it's more looking out. There is a management team that runs each of the global programs. So I mentioned 5 different programs. There are people sitting over, for youth, very much focused on events and programming and engaging staff. And they were running hackathons, running the Force for Good program has a program team that are very much, as you would say, portfolio managers. They each have a book of clients and projects that they're engaging and making sure that they're shepherding those projects along to success. We have a huge tech support team. So we have a support team of about 7 or 8 individuals that are there on the back end to make sure that all the solutions are being developed in the right way. We're not taking enterprise level technology solutions and embedding it into nonprofits. So that means we're creating or working with solutions that often our staff have not done before. And that's actually by design. So it's a great way for our staff to be made uncomfortable and to have to be thinking in different ways about the way that they deliver technology. It's a huge skill set that they bring back. But we have that bridge or the liaison with our tech team to really help the individuals that are engaging on the work understand how to do that right and really thinking that through. So, and then there's talent that are being brought in when we think about emerging talent. We have a program staff team that is really helping the talent when they get here. For lack of a better term, you might call them more of like a caseworker. So you come in, you're new to the firm, you're new to a professional environment. We want to make sure that we're setting you up for success. So we have staff that work in that model as well to make sure that individuals are being properly welcomed in to the firm and have a successful career path.
Yeah, great. So the question from Jean, which was I was thank you, Jean. You could do my job. So it's 50 dedicated staff. So that's their full-time role. Presumably, it's not including all the volunteer time.
No, our staff isn't considered volunteer because it is dedicated, as you just said. So we're engaging thousands of volunteers every year. So if we're running a hackathon, we ran a hackathon over the weekend in Texas. There was a couple hundred volunteers that come to that. We run about 30 hackathons a year. So, you do the math. Every time we run an event, every time we go to a conference, all the volunteers that are engaging on our Force for Good projects. Every project has somewhere between 6 and 8 individuals, and we're running over 150 projects every year. So it adds up with the individuals that are coming.
Do you have any sense of the FTE, the full-time equivalent hours that go into?
It's hundreds of thousands of hours a year that we're doing that. We've talked about that it makes sense for us to quantify that. So there are different ways. In the US, we have something called the independent sector that individuals will kind of monetize. But it's a hard thing to do. And nonprofits often come to us and they say, what was the value of this project that you just did? And there's a couple of different ways. And they often want to know because they want to be able to go back to their board members and say, look at what I did. So there's a couple of different ways we'll direct them. And we'll say, well, if we didn't do it, how would you have gotten this done? Would you have paid somebody? And what would you have paid them to do it? You could count that as your value because we don't sell this as a service. We're not a law firm who otherwise would have charged a client. We never would have sold tech services. So that's one way. And it's something we sometimes say, talk about, okay, well, you would have spent $10,000 to get that database built out. Now you spent nothing because we just did it for you. And you just had to buy the license if that was the case. Or it could be, there is that number and it could be in the US, I don't know what the latest number is. It was last time I checked, it was like 100, 175. And you could say, okay, well, we can tell you how many hours we engaged in a project. And that particular project was 300 hours. You could say, okay, for that particular effort, we've gotten pretty granular. We were using a kind of a blended number, if you will, because you have different levels of staff as well. You have staff that are a couple of years into their career and staff that are maybe 10 plus years into their career. The value of their hour is not the same. So it gets really technical and it's too challenging. So it's not something, from a tax standpoint or a legal standpoint, it doesn't make sense for us to go too crazy. So we tend to err on how much would you have paid for this if you otherwise didn't? To be fair, some of these companies come back or these organizations and they say, well, I would have never been able to do it. And we're like, well, that's a huge value in and of itself. So they don't, we can say, but you could go out and get a quote. You can go get a quote from somebody, even if you weren't going to do it. But it's sometimes really important for the organization to be able to communicate that value back. So that's a way that we recommend they do it.
But it's a significant number of hours, even at minimum wage, hundreds of thousands of hours start to add up. And is that time, is it part of the working time typically, or is it sort of additional time or a blend of
it's very much part of the day job. We say that organizations individual staff, they can give about 10% of their work week to this when they're engaging. So it's significant. So if you're thinking we're working a 40-hour week, wink, wink. But it's about 10% of your work week. We say it's about half a day that people can engage. It's not every day. It's not every week. It's not every month, but it's as people are engaging, and it varies. If you're going on project-based work, it's concentrated in one way. If you're going to an event, it could be, hey, you have an 8-hour shift, or you're going to a 2-hour event. It completely varies. So we try again, meet our clients, meet our staff where they are as well, to give them different ways to engage, because if they claim what's going on in their personal lives, different time slots work. But most of our things can happen during the workday. Some of our events, like our hackathons, often go over a weekend as well.
But net, it's not an insignificant amount of money and time and resource on anybody's below anybody's dime. How do you measure the impact internally? Because that's a lot of time and resource, no matter how you dress it up. And you've got 50 full-time people in the context of a very large organisation. That's not huge, but someone somewhere is counting some numbers.
This is a lot of different ways. And this is a question that comes up all the time on my team about how do you measure impact of social impact? And there's a lot of different things you can be doing. It's everything from the statistical that you were just talking about of how many people are engaging, how many hours and such, but it's often through the stories as well. So when we talk about an organization that before we had engaged couldn't do X, but now can do Y, that's part of the story as well. We often ask our organizations to tell us what the impact was. Instead of us making it up, we ask them. So we will ask some very thoughtful questions pre and post, and even during engagements with organizations that we can better tell that story. We will, when it comes to talent, we'll talk about individuals that that otherwise had not been given an opportunity to enter the workforce or to enter a professional organization like JP Morgan. So we'll count talent in that way. We'll look at individuals and their educational backgrounds. How many more people are we welcoming who have different types of educational backgrounds and not your traditional university degree? So we're looking at all of those types of metrics as well. We're looking at, when it comes to social media, how often are people using certain hashtags, talking about us on social media? We'll track that. Are we in a conversation? Are people reposting things that we are posting to be talking about the dialogue? So a lot of different pieces that we can be measuring through.
Interesting. Was that your lawnmower or something?
I'm sorry. My husband
No.
is cutting down outside, and he just showed me. I can share. I said, "You better be careful because I'm pretty sure there's a bird's nest in that tree." And he just came up to the window and went like this, and he showed me he got the bird nest out. I don't know if that means.
Oh no.
I'm glad that. So hopefully we can rehome the bird's nest. But yes, he's cutting the tree down for the neighbors.
There'll be less tweeting going on for all sorts of reasons this week then. So
yeah,
there we go.
I'll try to keep it all goes.
So you talk about, it's really, there's a number of ways that you measure impact within the organization. And I think that what's the thing that when it comes down to it, if the board turned around and said, "Oh, we're thinking of culling this," what's the one thing that you think they would really, they won't, don't worry, this isn't breaking news, Ali. Maybe they will.
I mean, there's dual impact. Without a doubt, staff want this. Existing staff feel better about working at JP Morgan. I can say that without any concern. Like, staff want to be able to say that we work for an organization that cares, and not only cares, but cares about the things that they care about. So we consider this to be an employee benefit. We were just, one of my colleagues and I were just on another call earlier, and we were saying, tell us where you want to engage. Tell us which organizations matter to you, and those will be the ones that we work with. If you have families. So I think staff will feel very disconnected. They won't have an outlet. And suddenly when staff are working really a lot these days, working these crazy hours, and you're saying, okay, but when you want to connect to your personal beliefs, all after hours. So that would be taking away a huge employee benefit that staff have very easily shown is very important to them. Externally, we're taking away a huge resource to the social sector. So in that in two ways. One, it's just, so actually three, I can think of, like, one, it's just something that we deliver and we know we're making an impact. We take on organizations that really need this service, not an organization that like, oh, this is just a nice to have, this feels fun, I just felt like I'd have a new app. Like, we're looking for organizations that this is going to be a bit of a game changer in their ability to reach their constituents and ultimately serve on their mission. When we do that, when JP Morgan says, hey, I'm going to dedicate 50 staff and millions of dollars to this effort, that says, oh, well, if you can do it, maybe I can do it. Other companies are joining the conversation. And we knew that other companies were doing this, but now it becomes this shared conversation. So with the Tech for Good Symposium that we are part of with a lot of the individuals here, it's a great dialogue for us to be able to say, here's how we do it. How do you do it? And like, we can teach you, you can teach us. So we create this collective conversation. If we got removed from that, then people are kind of off on their own, and it's never as impactful as the collective working together to go forward. So I think those are kind of three of the different ways that I think really would make a big difference if this wasn't there in the space. I'm still surprised that more companies don't do it. I'm always very careful when we talk about this, that people don't think, again, that we started with this. We started from nothing and we built to this. So I think that's a really critical part for us to understand. But it's not about dropping in all of this different programming. It's really thinking about, what does an organization particularly need on the corporate side? What do you want to think about? What's going to be most impactful for you and your staff? And then starting small and really growing into what really matter for your staff. So very much, while this makes sense in a story now, this is a ecosystem that evolved over time, very much in response to our stakeholder demand.
Interesting. So I want to talk about some of the projects that you think you can have an impact on. But before we do that, you sent me some of the examples of projects that you'd done, and then they are very wide and varied. Are there any particular ones that you could highlight just as an example? I thought the Felix project about food waste.
Yeah, the Felix one's an interesting one because it's unexpected. So the Felix project is a London, some of you may be familiar with it, but it's a London food-based redistribution waste charity. And they're very much focused on, so it's not just about how do they tackle waste and hunger. What we did for them was a data visualization project. And we came in and helped them think about, here's ways that you can communicate back to your donors and to your funders about actually for all those companies or those food organizations that are, or restaurants that are donating food to you, how much CO2 emissions are you now eliminating for the environment because they didn't actually have to put those into regular waste and actually got to be repurposed. So you end up reducing CO2 emissions. So not only are you actually helping to tackle hunger, you're also actually tackling an environmental issue. And that's it's just a better story. So I think one of the biggest eye openers when I joined the nonprofit space 20 plus years ago was how competitive it was. So I kind of hoped and I assumed, like a little bit too Pollyanna, just thinking like everybody would come in and we're all in it for the greater good. We're all trying to solve these major issues. But so many organizations are competing with one another for funding and really trying to make sure that they can get the next grant from a particular organization. So as much as we want to differentiate ourselves to staff, they need to differentiate themselves to funders. So when they can go to a funder and say, hey, we're not just actually tackling hunger, we're tackling an environmental issue as well, it can actually get them more funding as needed. So that's been a fun one that we just recently built out.
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually at Business to Software had our first in-person conference for 2.5 years recently, which was fabulous. It's so nice seeing people in 3 dimensions, and even BO is like, well, no, it's a novelty. But one of the speakers there was a lady called Tessa Clark from a company called Olio, who is it's a food sharing app, but for profit rather than charity. And I think there's some really interesting different approaches that charity or not-for-profits and for-profit organisations can take. And I guess 20 years ago, I'd have said, well, charity is a better thing than for-profit. Are you being attacked by Bruno?
Did you meet my dog last time that we talked?
No, yeah. But I've done my research,
Yeah. You can introduce Bruno. There he is.
Oh, hi, Hound. I'm very pleased my cats haven't broken into my office here, because they would have squealed.
Yeah, for some reason my husband walked in my door. So he's just a little upset that he's not on the tree. Yeah.
What happens, we talked about this a little bit early on. So you've got these programs and your approach to do things, and there's generally a planned and structured decision-making process. Okay, earthquake happens. Emergency. How do you engage with those sorts of things?
So I think our initial reaction when different crises were happening around the world was like, oh, we have to help. The best thing that JP Morgan can do as a first responder is to send money, because we're not an expert in crisis resolution. So, and I think too often, and we've had to I think people had to settle into that, because people are like, no, I want to go help. I'm going to show up with a shovel. It's like,
I'm going to send my spare mattresses. We had, lots of very well-meaning people kind of collecting toilet roll in our neighbourhood and putting it in vans, and it's like, no,
and then it
I'm
sits,
pretty sure.
And then it kind of knocks somewhere as it goes through kind of customs, as it's trying to get into like the Ukraine or wherever, like where you name your crisis.
Yeah.
So I think JP Morgan is recognized and we're comfortable with the first thing as a first responder, we send money. And I think they do that really well. They have, money set aside, things are going to happen in the world, and they will send money, and then they'll let staff do matching donations, and they'll encourage staff to donate money. So it happens two-sided. where my group from a social impact steps in is we think of ourselves as second or third responders. So when things have settled in and organizations or communities need to rebuild or need to enhance their services and better deliver, that's where we come in a much better way. So we're not going to focus first. We can stay out of the way first, but we're very much watching and we're talking to organizations, and we might be doing advisory on the side. There have been times from a technical standpoint we've stepped in where organizations need to increase their capacity. In my formal organization, we actually pretty much had to launch our services faster than we wanted to during 9/11. And during 9/11, this is pre-JP Morgan, we were literally downtown, and the first thing that we were doing was actually papering out to make sure that individuals, as they were coming back into their buildings, saying, don't turn on your machines, because machines were covered in dust. And we kept saying, like, so we had a partnership, I believe it was with Microsoft at that time, where we were gathering up equipment and actually doing proper cleaning of machines. So it's like, we will go down to the biggest, to the grassroots effort, wherever it's needed to engage. And that's where we're focused most when it comes to a crisis.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Who are your competitors? Don't say no one. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying before. We don't think of ourselves as having competitors,
but you can't. It's not an acceptable answer.
It's true, though. It's like, are there other companies doing social good well? Absolutely. So like we work really closely and we try and partner with all of them. So the value of having this, like when I talk about the symposium, is just we can do referrals. We don't like having to turn people away, and we do. And sometimes it's like, well, because you need this very specific solution. We try to be product agnostic. We will definitely implement different services. But when you think about like a Microsoft or a Salesforce, they're not product agnostic, nor should they be. They have a solution. And when they're going to do something in a social impact way, they should use a Microsoft solution or a Salesforce solution. We will do both. It depends on what the organization needs. So I think in that sense, we don't really usually partner with other companies when we're actually delivering solutions, but we will refer and we'll kind of reach out to others and like ask for guidance on something if we need to learn something. But as far as competitors, like there's no reason to be we're not competing for anything. We're competing for talent. So if you ask me that question,
competing for talent, mindshare.
Yeah. So all of that. So like we want people to know, hey, we're doing this. So we want to make sure that people understand, and we're doing this at scale. And I think for a long time, JP Morgan wasn't really telling the story to the level that we could be. And we're trying to do better about that now without people feeling like we're trying to mask for something else, because we're doing it and we're doing it really authentically. This isn't just the one headline. This isn't just a day of service. This is a very embedded way that we do business at JP Morgan. And we know that that can be a real differentiator when we're competing for talent.
So who are the 2 or 3 organizations that, in your view, do this sort of thing really well, that you can take ideas from, you can share ideas, but they are having an impact in the way that they do things?
I think so many do it really well. I mean, some of the organizations that we partner with regularly are Salesforce. Salesforce is often a solution that we're giving out, often because of the free licenses that they'll give to organizations. Google has been a great model for what we're doing as well, because of like what they've been doing lately in the education space. And their content and how they're willing to give out training to individuals, especially in the emerging talent space, which has been really impactful for the work that we're doing. But then there's smaller companies as well that are engaging kind of more in a day-to-day hands-on, but much more with their specific services. So we learn from all of them in different things. So we try and attend all the conferences. We try and make sure that we certainly don't think that we've got this down pat, and there's lots of room for evolution in what we're doing. So we just like being in the conversation.
Great. So 2010, let's call it a decade. And you've come a long way, baby, in the words of, I can't remember who came up with that song. But you've come a long way, and where are you going to be? This is one of those stupid interview questions, isn't it? Where do you see yourself being in 10 years?
Retired. That would be my goal. I feel like I can finally say that based on where I am in my career. But yeah, in 10 years, ideally retired. We'll see. What I realize is, I think there's a little bit of an opportunity for evangelism here. And I very much have been so heads down focused on let's get this built out. Let's scale this. Let's make sure that we're reaching all these organizations. But not focusing on telling the story has been some of it a disservice to JP Morgan, and also just to the idea of really delivering on social impact and corporates and nonprofit partnering in very thoughtful ways. So I'd love to spend the next several years doing a lot more of that evangelism, helping companies and organizations recognize this is not that hard. You just got to be thinking about it and asking the right questions. So I think that's where we're going next. In this, we'll continue to scale, we'll continue to deliver, but I'm hoping to see us more out there telling this story and learning from others that are also engaging that we might not have realized.
Fabulous. So how do the organisations that, knowing what they know now about you in the UK, and I know there are a lot watching, how do they get in touch with you? It's probably, I know your email address, so as long as that 10 Bitcoin has arrived, I won't give that out. But what's the best process?
I would hope it'd be worth more than 10 bit. But no, I have no problem with anybody reaching out to me, but we will share a link where people can kind of engage their interests as an organization, but people are more than welcome to reach out to me directly. You can connect to me over LinkedIn. My email is ali.morano@JPM Chase. They don't make them that secretive. So people are more welcome to reach out to me and ask questions, and I will absolutely kind of delegate out to the team depending on what your interests are. And fully respect that when organizations reach out, sometimes they're not quite sure how to engage, but they just know they want to do something. So we're open to those kinds of conversations as well, so that we can help take you down the right path.
That's great. So I think we are being made to wrap up now. But what's the question that you wished I had asked you, Ellie? Such a
maybe why do you keep doing it?
Why do you? Hey, it's a drug, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. You know, I am one of those lucky few who can wake up every day and say, I get to do something good for the world, or I get to, maybe more importantly, I go to sleep each night and say, yeah, we probably did something good today. We definitely did something good. It's a feel-good moment. And it's fun when, we know within the organization that anybody will call us up and tap us, say, we need a good story. We're about to talk about this, or it's LGBT month, or it's mental health awareness month coming up. We want to make sure that we can tell a story. Do you have anything? And it's almost a joke. And it's like, yeah, let me send you 10 things. And not just what I've done in the last 10 years, but what I've done in the last 10 weeks is what the way that we're engaging, because we've got to that scale. So it's really fun to see the scale. And I think that keeps us going, and also just to know the potential. So I think that's one of the reasons we all keep doing it, to feel really good about it.
Amazing. And to keep scaling, do you have to, there's a point where you can't grow organically, you're going to have to partner more, is that?
I think one of the things that we could be doing more in is the more we talk to organizations, we recognize that it's not just tech in a box. There's other skill sets that need to come into the conversation. You need to be talking about marketing, operations, HR processes. So I think we need to be partnering more across the broader organization and bringing in other skill sets. But there are ways, there is orders of magnitude when you welcome in new staff about being able to take on a larger portfolio and reach more and more organizations, especially as we start introducing different types of project and program types.
Fabulous. Ali, I fear that we're being attacked by another thin on top and thick underneath man, which means that we're probably on time here. But thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.
Right.
Really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to seeing what happens next. Thank you.
Wonderful. Honestly, thank you so much. That was amazing. We're all sitting through in the boardroom watching that live, and just amazing stories, Ali, about what you've achieved in, I think it's 10 years you mentioned that you've been launching this program. And if it's all right, I just want to be one last little question from me, if it's all right. We've
it's the Colombo close.
I know. We've asked a lot today about calls to action, right? And we there's a lot of people watching this either live or on record, and there'll be a cross section of people from the third sector, from corporates, people just interested in volunteering. Probably a question for you is, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody that's either sitting in one of these large organizations that really has been inspired by what they've heard from you, that wants to just get started and do something, what would your advice be to that person to say, how do they make that leap forward? How do they initiate the change that needs to happen in order to get something started in their business?
I think it's finding your champions. Ideally the more senior the better, but I think what's always interesting is that we tend to find actually some actually very senior champions, and then it's sometimes middle management where it gets stuck because they get in their head like, this is going to slow things down. You're going to take somebody away from their day job. So find your champions, find yourself one or two individuals like, I get this, and then make sure that the organizations that you start working on first actually matter to that particular champion. So pull at their heartstrings so that not only did this feel good, you did something for them, whether it be their personal passion, something that their spouse or their friend or family works on, but that makes a big difference. And then just start small, but scope it out. Definitely write it down. Don't feel like you're over engineering it or overthinking it if you don't write it out. You got to make sure that both sides of that equation know what's going to happen. So that could just be like, hey, this is just an MOU, a memorandum of understanding, and these are the 10 things that I'm going to do. And actually, by the way, this is what I'm not going to do. And if you want me to do those things, I can come back, but I'm hoping to get this done in the next 10 weeks. And this is what we're going to make sure it's got some structure and guardrails around it so that it's all doable. And then it's not so scary. And then just get going and then bring a friend. It's always more fun when you volunteer with somebody else because then and also it gives the organization not just one point of reliance, but other people that they can talk to and just have a brainstorm there. So volunteering in groups is always a better thing.
Amazing, thank you. That's brilliant, and what a brilliant way to close. And I think that final piece of advice links perfectly to the whole theme of today and all of the conversations it's had. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you so much, Ali, for joining us. Thank you, Mark, for leading that interview as well. Really appreciate both of your times. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So what a wonderful session, and it's there's one session left, which is our founder and CEO Alistair Forbes is gonna give his closing remarks today. But just before we move into that, I think what Ali just talked about there in terms of finding the right person in the operation, finding the right person in the organization to move things forward. If you are that person in the operation, down here in this link here, which hopefully my friend Michael is gonna bring up, we have got the Tech Alliance, the Tech for Good Alliance that was announced earlier today. There's never been a better time to get involved in the Tech for Good. The requirement has never been as big. And I believe the momentum has also never been as big for people to want to get involved in Tech for Good. And there's so many opportunities. And you've heard today from many different speakers, panel discussions, keynote sessions about the good that Tech for Good does, not just for the third sector organization from which the need comes from, but actually from those people that are involved, people's purpose, people's ambitions being realized by being able to work and add value to an operation, an organization that they would previously never have known about or maybe never have worked with. The theme today seems to have been a lot about collaboration from competitors. We had a Tech for Good Titan session where we had essentially what would happen in the corporate world as competitors for the same business, talking about how they collaborate together in aid of Tech for Good. We've heard a lot about, we started the day talking about the concept of there needing to be a change in the way that people view work and the way that the pandemic and the current cost of living crisis has impacted people's view on the world of work has definitely changed. And we're at that point now where there is a better way of doing this. There's a better way of adding more employee engagement, more purpose to what people do. And Tech for Good and getting involved in the Alliance is certainly one big way of making that first step. So please, if you haven't watched all of the sessions from today, I'd encourage you to go back and watch the sessions because there was so much great value that came from each of the different conversations that was had. I said at the start today that there's not many conferences that can claim that lives will change as a result of it. That has doubled in terms of my view, having sat and listened to all of the conversations that has happened today. Anybody listening and watching some of these sessions cannot walk away from today thinking that there is an opportunity to add more value do more good globally with this movement. So with that in mind, I'm going to thank you for attending all of the sessions today. I'm going to hand you over to Alistair Forbes, who's going to give us his closing remarks. So I'm going to go next door to Alistair, our founder and CEO of the Scottish Tech Army.